Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, I want to thank you for joining me again. I've had a long series of shows today. Coming with me now is Rory Varrato. I think I pronounced that right. I'm trying to put the vibration in the R's. He is the media team or part of the media team for Extinction Rebellion. Please, tell the audience hello.
Hi, audience. How are you doing?
So you contacted me, asking me about would I essentially talk about Extinction Rebellion or would I be interested? And my answer to that was absolutely yes. I tend to do environmental stuff all the time, and this tends to be a high priority for me. And so I really do appreciate you coming on to the show to discuss Extinction Rebellion. I've heard right much about it just from my own media circle, so I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you giving us a platform.
To add context to what we're about to talk about, I usually make this argument that there is an asteroid that's going to hit the planet, that ultimately, Earth is a habitable space. We're flying through the cosmos, and ultimately, there are certain rules governing our behavior that go beyond just this kind of capitalistic pursuit of profit, that it go towards recognition that we're in a habitable space that we need in order to live. Going beyond that point, risk our own levels of extinction. So I make this as an asteroid that's about to hit the planet because I want to create this dire threat that oftentimes within global warming, you don't necessarily see, or with climate change, it's this kind of slow propagation of action. Just to set the context to this, right here. So Donald Trump in his own share this so people can see it, present to everyone. This is Washington Post. This is not some, weird magazine. Last month, deep in a 500-page environmental impact statement, the Trump administration made a startling assumption. On its current course, the planet will warm disastrous 7 degrees by the end of the century. This is Trump's own report. 7 degrees. A rise of 7 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 4 degrees Celsius, compared with the pre-industrial levels, would be catastrophic, according to scientists. Many coral reefs will dissolve in increasingly acidic oceans. Part of the Manhattan and Miami would be underwater without costly coastal defenses. Extreme heat waves will routinely smother larger parts of the globe. Now, but the administration did not offer a dire forecast premised on the idea that the world failed to cut its greenhouse gas emissions as part of the argument about climate change. Just the opposite. The analysis assumes that the planet fate is already sealed. Trump's assumption is, look, at 2100, the temperature is going to go up to 7 degrees. We can't do anything about it, so what does it matter? Let's get all the oil that we can get. Let's make all the money that we can make, because by 2100, we're done. Now, that's an amazing thing for a guy who said it doesn't exist. It gets worse. It's not just about the temperature. As carbon dioxide levels rise, major crops lose nutrients. Essentially, what scientists are finding is that the high levels of carbon dioxide is almost like candy. And even though you may get a larger yield, the amount of nutrients within the foods themselves are starting to go down. Again, this is purely human-driven behavior. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on Monday, these guys are the hard-nosed scientists. They build our jets, planes, bombs. They explain our universe to us. These same guys come out and say, you have 12 years left. And usually they're pretty solid on this stuff. This is sort of a hair-raising report that these guys are making, saying, oh my God, you have 12 years left. I keep going with this. Insect biodiversity. We're within the context of the sixth mass extinction, where they're finding insect drop-off in tremendous worrying levels. Great. I guess my point is, there are a ton of these stats that you can do to kind of get across that something is fundamentally wrong with the way that we've been organizing ourselves. And the last one, unfair. The richest 62 people in the world as much wealth as the half of the population. That's amazing in and of itself. But that's amazing in the context of the system itself has allowed all of these other people to prosper magnificently while externalizing the cost on the rest of the population. That cost being extinction. That is insane. But those are the stats. Those, that's the context to which you find yourself. Now, you guys have made the decision to not go quietly into the good night, meaning you guys have essentially started to rebel. Now, what is Extinction Rebellion? Just so people can understand what this organization is.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you framed the context very well, and you hit it on the head at the outset with the emphasis on the habitability of the planet. It's not just climate breakdown; it's all these interconnected phenomena that include biodiversity loss and inequality, et cetera, et cetera. So Extinction Rebellion basically acknowledges and recognizes that fact or those facts. And so one of our first demands actually is that we speak honestly and truthfully about the empirical reality of the human situation on Earth in the year 2019 and everything that entails. And we practice that ourselves. And we demand that governments and corporations and media also speak truthfully. So we've come together sort of as a collective, as a social movement that's now spreading organically around the world, and people that are sort of already awake or already aware are coming out of the woodwork. It's like a signal flare has gone up. I think Extinction Rebellion actions in London when they shut down the bridges in, I think it was on November 17th of last year, was really like a clarion call. And now we've come together and spreading around the world, and we're trying to take decentralized direct action to really get people more on the page of reality, I guess, and cut through the bullshit and take some serious action.
Is there like an audio going on in the background?
Pardon me?
Is there they're getting interference in the background? It's like I don't think that's me. I did my other show and I didn't have any issue with this. Let's see if there's something else there.
Could be some kind of echo. I could grab headphones.
Okay, yeah. See if that works. I mean, maybe the headphones work. I mean, my headphones and that might do it. I'm sorry, guys. Give us 1 second. We're trying to work this out. Bad audio. Finally, it's you. It's not me. My audio worked fine on the other issue. Wasn't sounding your audio. It's not me, Clyde. I've just had an interview. There was no issue with the audio.
I'm sure it's me.
Well, we're about to find out. I have my audience who's trying to inform me that it's me. I don't know how they would know that from their position, but okay.
I appreciate the feedback, though. All right.
This. All right. How about now?
Yeah, is this better?
Yes. Okay. I don't hear it. Beforehand, it was like a background interference that was taking place, but that sounds better.
Okay, excellent. Should I repeat what I was saying, or
yes? Please repeat what you were saying. Just because if I cut the video, I want them to be able to get it.
Gotcha.
Essentially, how did Extinction Rebellion start? And let's start there. What is Extinction Rebellion? Let's go with that question.
Perfect. Extinction Rebellion is a grassroots movement that recognizes and acknowledges the empirical reality that you were just describing: climate breakdown, biodiversity loss, obscene and rising inequality, basically the destruction of a habitable planet by the global system of capitalism that we're all caught within. And so Extinction Rebellion takes that as our starting point. We're not like sort of dancing around that or trying to appease people in positions of power to try and bring them to our side. We're saying, no, in fact, they have fucked the world and we have to rebel genuinely and authentically, So we really draw, I mean, it was begun in England and they have documents and declarations that draw on John Locke and other, political theorists and make a very sincere and compelling case that the powers that be, the organization of society as it presently exists, is not just unfair or whatever you want to call it, but actively dangerous and threatening to all of life on Earth, including human life. And so Extinction Rebellion is just spreading organically around the world among people who are already on this page, and maybe who have felt isolated or felt like they didn't have an organization with which to collaborate. And we're coming out of the woodwork, and we're joining to take direct action and civil disobedient action and disrupt business as usual, and hopefully create a sea change, that can reorganize society.
I saw in your documents that you were modeling this to some degree off the civil rights movement, and the way that the civil rights movement would essentially instigate itself is like let's say like a lunch counter. And this thing of me standing in your space, this kind of sit in a place where I'm not necessarily supposed to be. It's not going to be business as usual. You're going to acknowledge my presence and that there's the issue here. I mean, for fuck's sake, like some of this stuff, like the biodiversity thing in and of itself, the sixth mass extinction, the carbon dioxide thing, where the food is going lesser. Even Donald Trump's proclamation about 2100, where essentially our goose is cooked. Like those are massive things. You would think at the point where a report comes out and says, from the president of the United States, who's insisted that global warming didn't exist, when that report comes out and says by 2100 we're cooked, but that's massive. It's hard for me to reconcile. The world is coming to an end, but don't do anything about it.
Right.
This kind of soothing incrementalism, and this belief that there's going to be some kind of magical technology that saves everyone. I find this to be nonsense.
Yes, I completely agree. And, I came to Extinction Rebellion from a pre-existing academic interest in human extinction. So I'm a doctoral student here at Columbia, and I started studying human extinction about 2 years ago. And I felt very isolated and alone for some of the reasons that you just articulated. There seemed to be just this widespread denialism, even among people who ostensibly believe in climate change, But
I think it's hard to reconcile.
Yeah, I think the conclusion is that we must recognize that these people are either deluding themselves, or they're genuinely sociopathic, psychopathic, and only interested in their short-term gain, basically looting the treasury while the world burns. I think that's what Trump's about.
And you were studying oh God, this is going to get us down the path. But you're studying the collapse of civilizations. And in the collapse of civilizations, was there a commonality with this kind of 1% that was somewhat disassociated from the repercussions of their actions? Like if, like for example, ExxonMobil, I think going back to the 80s, knew that climate change was a real thing, but decided to hide it because it would have adversely affected profits if they came out and says, oh God, we're burning the world. Is there a similarity between our civilization with the standpoint of the 1% believing that they will somehow be spared or somehow distinct from the rest of the population when it collapses?
Yes, I think so. I think historically that's true. I would say there's sort of two prongs though, because you can talk about civilizations that have collapsed in the past, historically, Roman Empire, whatever, but those collapses were never bumping up against like wholesale ecological devastation, right? They were social collapses that were usually caused by inequality, like you mentioned. And I think also there's an element of complexity. As a society grows and becomes more complex and power is centralized at the top, especially in a hierarchical arrangement, the decision makers are unable to cope with changing circumstances. So they just kind of enrich themselves and hope that things will carry on. But we know, I know you've spoken with Richard Wolff, and this is one of his points, like under capitalism, the system basically crashes every 7 to 10 years, and it's like baked in. So how can we be okay with that? And especially in this situation where we're reaching a point, I think, where the crises of capitalism are converging with the crises of ecology. Yeah.
So what are your demands? Well, two things. Well, I think you mentioned this. It started in London. That's the first point. And my memory of this came from London, where people were putting their bodies on the line in order to protest climate march, and there were some powerful speeches that were coming out of London within regards to Extinction Rebellion. I do remember that. Yeah. So I'm going to, that's going to be the first question. How did it start? Like, what was the things that brought people together in order to start it? Because at some point there has to be an accrual of like-minded people that come together and become something, as opposed to these kind of disparate elements. And the second one, what are the demands of the organization itself? Because I read that you were being very clear. It wasn't like Occupy, where it was like, yeah, man, we're just kind of in this peacenik stuff. We have specific demands that we want to accomplish, and we're going to be uncompromising in trying to accomplish those demands. I mean, after all, the world's at stake. You know, you can be pretty uncompromising. The world is at stake.
That's exactly correct. And I think, so I'll get to that. And I think that's what distinguishes us from Occupy. But to the first part of your question, you know, some of it is shrouded in secrecy, right? The origins. I don't know enough about it to speak about the earliest origins, but basically there were open letters issued in late October signed by many prominent academics, including Naomi Klein, Noam Chomsky, Bill McKibben, and others. And they basically articulated this platform that, you know, we have to take immediate, drastic grassroots action in order to maybe survive basically what's coming. And from that, pretty much concurrently, there emerged this grassroots movement that began in London, I think, largely on November 17th, with the shutdown of about 5 major bridges over the Thames River. Wow. And and that got widespread international attention. And shortly afterward, the mayor of London declared a climate emergency. So that was a real policy result. We'll see if anything actually more comes of it, but you know, that's something. And from there now, that energy has spread. And I think other people have recognized that we can get results and we can follow the models of nonviolent movements in the past, including the American Civil Rights Movement and others, and maybe we can urgently create some change. So then that brings us to the demands, right? The demands are our starting point in some sense. I think with Occupy, there was just discontent that coalesced, and they never really articulated clear demands, although they did come up with excellent language, right? The 99%, the 1%, yeah. That's huge. But for us, we have 3 key demands, and we're working on expanding others. And I can tell you the 3, and then there's a 4th element that I think is important. The first demand is one I think I might have touched on a little bit, that we speak truthfully about the empirical reality of the human situation. So we practice that ourselves, we familiarize ourselves with the science, and we learn how to communicate effectively about it, because it's not just about the science. If it was, Al Gore would have saved the world 10 years ago or whatever with his documentary, you know. So it's about how you explain the science, I guess. So that's part of it. So we demand that of ourselves, we demand that of others, including governments and mainstream media and blah, 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 corporations. The second demand is the reduction to net zero of carbon emissions by 2025, which is close to the Green New Deal proposal, I think, by, you know, begun by the Green Party and then picked up by, AOC picked it up, exactly. And I think, so, but we're a little more like urgent and desperate, you know, and so we say 2025, really it should be tomorrow, you know, or yesterday. But so that's the second demand, and we have more, we're developing more specific mechanisms for achieving that, policy measures and things. And then the third demand is, and I think for me this is the most significant actually, is the creation of citizens' assemblies that can sort of operate in parallel to existing governments, basically saying, look, fuck the government. They're not going to help us. In fact, they're actively hurting us. We need to form essentially a shadow government, a people's government that's rooted in democratic, authentic democratic principles of people coming together to create a survivable plan of action. You know,
you have no idea how much I love that last one. I've had other ideas. I've had ideas like that of an underlying structure to the government itself that essentially had a crowd behind it. Because ultimately what we're talking about is the crowd, the populace. Yes. What does the populace puts its trust into? And if it has this belief that, all right, these guys in the government are bought, And so we have this kind of citizen assembly where it can be pushed to action for a particular policy, meaning they can't get elected because they don't have a block of people in order to get them elected. Like, you start to wield political force that's underlying the governmental structure itself. I love that one.
Me too, man. That's what drew me to the movement, to tell you the truth. I was on the page with climate stuff already, but it's that political approach, because collective action is our only tool as a species to address this problem. And that collective action is not going to come through capitalist, neoliberal, structures of government that exist right now. It's just not. They're the ones killing us.
The Paris deal is not doing it for you. Obama's Paris deal didn't just solve all this stuff.
Yeah, no, surprisingly, we knew at the time it wasn't enough, and then Trump unilaterally withdraws. It's a joke, I think.
So one catch with this: is it solidified enough? So I make the argument there's an asteroid that's about to hit the planet, because I try to make something that's somewhat amorphous tangible. Like if you could wake up in the morning, you go outside and you see a ball coming towards the planet that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger by the day, that is very close into your mind. The media would literally be showing, day 10 to shut, they get hit by an asteroid or something like that. Right. You get all of this media attention saying, oh my God, the world is at stake. We need Bruce Willis to go. All that stuff will take place. But because climate is not that way, where you're not seeing it in these kind of overt, blunt terms, it's this more amorphous thing that people will say, yeah, you should do something about the climate. But people tend to focus on their immediate needs over something that's more amorphous. Yes. Has that been somewhat of a problem of the organization? And how do you get around that in trying to bring people or bend their ear? Because keep in mind, I agree with you, people don't necessarily take a position based on purely intellectual arguments. Like a lot of that stuff is, there are other things that go along in it: culture, environmental decision, cognitive bias, meaning the things they've already agreed upon in the sense of their agreements. How do you get around that to try to make the point that, look, you getting your needs met is connected to climate?
Yeah. That's a fantastic question, and a huge question that requires multiple answers, I think. One, so you hit the nail on the head. Climate change is very difficult to wrap your mind around. There's a philosopher, Timothy Morton, who does work on what he calls hyperobjects, which are concepts that are so diffuse and distributed over space and time that we can't really grasp them, and climate change is one of them. So there's, I think, a multi-pronged approach. One is for Extinction Rebellion to sort of focus on people who already get it, right? That's where the energy can begin at, is people coming together that are already understanding and on the same page. And then from there, longer term, it's more educational, and it's about messaging. How do we reach people? I'm not sure. I think one way is to connect with the realities that they do face in their daily lives, and connect those especially to the government itself. And to understand that capitalism, which has created inequality and insecurity for so many people, is directly and intimately connected with the climate disaster. Yes. They're peas in a pod, Well,
all incentives go towards disaster. Like there's not, it's well, I can't say all. I mean, but I mean, there's an incentive to clean it up. I guess you can make that case, like trillions of dollars. Just from the standpoint of cleaning up. But if you're a company that is trying to make computers, it is not in your best interest to make a computer to last 20 years. You make that computer to last like a year, because if you make it for 20 years, you're going to run out of business.
Planned obsolescence, right?
Yeah, obsolescence. I mean, that in devices just as a basis of those companies in existence. You know what I mean? The biases and incentives are built into the system to some degree, but only to the top 1%.
Right.
Like, because they're the ones profiting off of this. Everyone else is accepting the external, the external, the cost of this, externalized cost.
Yes.
I agree with you. What do you, hyper objects? I like that term. It's like, how do you conceptually see this or put this together when it's not something that you're encountering in your everyday reality, but it's there nonetheless, and it makes it easier to even politicize, even though it's not a political conversation.
It shouldn't be, right? It's an existential conversation. You know, it's
But then we get back to the capitalist thing,
yeah.
where people in both parties, whether you're in oil and gas or whether you're in some other industry, don't necessarily want those changes to take place, even though the world is at stake. Like, that's the part that blows me away.
I know, man.
I make this reference to Star Trek. There's this episode of Voyager where they go to this planet of ocean life, where all of these creatures are living in the ocean, and they find out that based on their mining operations within that planetary space itself, that it was contracting the planet, making it less habitable. And even when given a new energy source, there was like, yeah, we're good with what we got. Now, you look at that, you're like, what? You're killing yourself. And then you wake up and, you eat a hamburger, you play Xbox, and you go about your way. Missing the association of, we're doing the same thing.
Yes. Yes. I mean, there's something in human psychology for sure. I mean, people smoke cigarettes, right? They know that kills them. They know that lots of things kill them, but they do it anyway. And I think there are psychological reasons at play that make people either unable or unwilling to change their behaviors, or even if their life is at stake.
So how do you win? Like, taking those cognitive biases into account? Because look, I agree with you. There was this woman, and to this day I feel horrible. But we got into a conversation on the Iraq War, and she's like, "Well, what do you mean Saddam had weapons of mass destruction?" And you're like, "No, he didn't."
No.
And she's like, "I'm like, Dick Cheney doesn't even say that." Like, but she would not, but because in her mind, no, this is what took place. People form a certain belief of reality, and it is really hard to pull them away. That's just human beings in general.
Yeah.
But you and your organization, in some way, is going to have to get around that. Not just you by yourself.
Right.
Like, ultimately, you're going to have to poke a hole in those biases in some way in order to get them on your side.
Yes.
How do you escalate? Let me ask that. So you guys have been putting on events where you guys have been going out. In fact, you have an action coming up tomorrow. Is that something that you want to plug for the audience themselves, or is that something internal to the group itself?
Yeah, no, I can talk about that to the audience. Tomorrow's our National Day of Action in the United States. It's the first National Day of Action. So January 26th, we'll be here in New York City conducting an action, which will hopefully go well and get some major attention, but also around the country. There are groups in Los Angeles and Portland and everywhere, small towns too. So we're springing into action tomorrow. And like I said, hopefully we're prepared, and hopefully we can get some attention. This is almost the sort of the launch of the U.S. Movement. So it should be big.
Association or making connections to other organizations like Movement for People's Party or some of the unions that are in the area in order to kind of beef up numbers? I mean, particularly if it's stuff that you guys are in similar alignment with, like from an ideology standpoint, where you can expand your playing field.
Yes, we have done that, and we're continuing to do that, and we're hoping to increase that, because really, because Extinction Rebellion and the specter of extinction affects everyone in every way, there should be a coalition that emerges, that's on the same page. So we've connected already with Black Lives Matter here in New York, the Women's March, indigenous movements, and many of the activists that have come to Extinction Rebellion come from other pre-existing organizations and movements. So we're sort of assembling a super team. That's the hope, I guess.
That's what I wish. I often wish that all of these marches, groups, because the left, everybody, any separate idea they want to create another group for. Right. It's like, this guy believes in Jesus. This guy believes Jesus had 6 fingers, and so he needs to create another group. But this kind of intersectionality, I find that to be somewhat of an amazing thing, but for whatever reason, people can never bring it about. Last question: what does it look like in the end? And let me explain what I mean by this. A system that is sustainable, because bringing it down to, like you said, 0 carbon, what does that world look like? And even if you can get rid of the question of how do you get to that world, at the very least, what does that world look like? And you may not be able to answer that, because I got to be honest, that is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to answer, but I'm going to put it out there anyway, because your group may have something in mind that you're just shooting for.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question, but it is a difficult one, and it's a somewhat open one. I think that the world, I mean, like you recognized at the beginning when you were looking at Trump's own report, uh, this disaster is coming. Like we are going to crash. We are currently crashing. Collapse is occurring. It's just not evenly distributed yet.
Yes.
Flint, Michigan would say it's here, for
Yeah.
example. And so I think the world, if we manage to figure something out, will be slower paced. It will be less focused on consumption. It will be more neighborly, necessarily smaller footprints, more communal living. Uh, we can't just go back to pre-industrial times, like we can't wind back the clock, but it's going to be something like that. We're going to take the best of what persists after the crash and use that to sort of form a more sustainable lifestyle, hopefully.
So you're assuming a crash.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a theory of change called punctuated equilibrium, basically a series of crashes, leading to a new homeostasis, new equilibrium.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're going through. So whether it's, the crises of capitalism or the depletion of various resources, including fossil fuels, crop failures that we know will be coming, droughts like the one that instigated the Syrian civil war. This shit is real. It's already here. It's just how we frame it and think about it. So
Marx would say it's until all of the energies of a particular system are extinguished, the system doesn't change.
right.
I guess that's the same thing with the punctuated equilibrium. Essentially, the mistakes are over and over and over, and then people say, "Okay, this doesn't work," or we're gonna take an L. I guess the question becomes: is it punctuated equilibrium? I guess under that model, there has to be a precipice where the civilization decides to either change or die. I mean, right? I mean, just as a somewhat of a logical consequence of a repeated injury over and over. It's like how many times can you stump your toe before it's resected, before they take it off?
Yes.
That's fascinating. Punctuated equilibrium. I had never heard of this saying.
Yeah.
But it makes sense. Just the term itself makes sense.
Yeah, it connects intuitively with Marxism. I think you would like it a lot.
Is there anything else that you want to tell the audience before we end? I really do appreciate you coming on. I think this was a great intro, and this kind of trying to make people's mindset focused on, because look, I think we end up in illusion to some degree, what they call it Maya. We end up in this kind of illusionary state where people play Xbox, people have family, people have all these things that they deal with on a daily basis. And it's like they know something is wrong with climate. It's not like they have never heard the term climate change. They know something is on, but got to pay my car payment.
Right.
My girlfriend needs flowers. My wife hates my girlfriend. Whatever the problems are. Like all these things occupy a life. And people sometimes miss the point that there's a larger reality over top of the individual bubbles of reality that the individuals set up for themselves.
Yes.
Breaking them out of that is hard. And I think also it becomes a certain identity of the individual to care about climate change as opposed to being something somebody does part-time. Like I guess you can call it the wokeness, or the person wakes up in a sense of like, oh, holy shit, there's a larger reality to what I'm interacting in.
Yes.
Is there anything that you want to tell the audience before we break? Like I said, I really do appreciate this conversation.
Yes. I mean, I really appreciate it too. And I thank you so much for having me on. And I hope we or other members of XR can speak with you again in the future as the movement continues.
Absolutely.
And I think you're right. I mean, I think egocentrism is basically, it's almost like we're going through an evolutionary filter for egocentrism. We've got it, the worst part of it exemplified by Donald Trump, and that's the structure that we have to destroy, that he heads. And a new way of being, a new kind of human nature has to emerge, one that's more concerned about the kinds of things you just mentioned. That expands beyond our small circle. And I guess what I would say to people that might be watching is, trust in your instincts that there are other folks out there who are already on this same page, right? We are out there. We might not be sort of waving the flag yet, but that's what Extinction Rebellion is about, waving this flag that we should all join together in this movement, and see what we can accomplish as a group, people who are on this page, people who do have this awareness. There are more of us than you think. I've been incredibly inspired by the way that the group here in New York City has coalesced in a very short amount of time. Virtual strangers have come together and found immediate trust in each other because we just get it. There's an intuitive connection that action needs to be taken, and this is the kind of action that needs to be taken. And I think that's really empowering. It can bring people out of their apathy and make them have hope again, even despite how, dire the situation looks. So
I often, God, I know that was going to be the last thing. This thing of human beings. You said something that human beings would have to have this kind of new, like an evolution, like a growth. They have to become something different than what they are. Is that environmental? Like, I often think that environment creates behavior. Maybe not so much as people, human being robots, but definitely a large share of the lion's share of what the individual is either some acceptance of society or pushing back against the society, but either way, they're working with elements of society. It's like, and how do you change the individual in a society that, like you said, is egocentric, like, and not just egocentric from the standpoint of the individual, but deifies the individual. Like if this guy has $20 billion, they don't care about the fact that that's money that's not going towards roads and railways or resources that are going towards things that are beneficial to individuals. They don't care about that. That guy could have $20 million in a mansion, and there's literally homeless village right there beside him. Yeah. And it would still deify him, missing the point that this $20 million to some degree is the reason why those people are sleeping on the streets. Like that, those are resources that are not necessarily being invested into the society or the community. This goes to the level of trillions. Yes. It's like how do you change that when the societal structure, be it political or media, deifies that? And because Ocasio-Cortez mentioned 70% tax rate on the top. And at one point under FDR was like 90-something%.
96, I think, or 94.
Yeah, people heads explode.
Yes.
It's like, no. I guess what I'm asking is, how do you reach that evolutionary platform where human beings are just different people when it seems that it's an environment that allows people to be different people? Like if you were in a completely different society where healthcare, all these needs were met and everything else, I think you would have better people just by virtue of your society, not having this kind of rooster, this crowing each other where they're trying to take each other's head off in a cockfight. Yeah. It's like, how do you get to that point when the society itself kind of instigates the behavior for people to behave in those ways?
I know that's part of the massive challenging question that we face. I think part of it is that we have a responsibility to speak openly about alternatives, right? So we have to recognize that, like everything you just described, the way that the society reinforces those norms, that's effectively gaslighting, it's effectively lying, it's effectively propaganda and indoctrination, right? So that's what I think, like this, the internet facilitates. Programs like yours and politicians like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they're coming, they now are able to speak from a different perspective and discover that there's a very receptive audience for that perspective. People do want to live differently. But at the same time, this society does select for competitiveness, cutthroat nature and things. So I don't know. I also, I'm an educator, and I think that a big problem in this country is lack of critical thinking. And I think that's deliberate, policy-wise, from school boards all the way to the top. And I think teaching critical thinking is essentially a subversive activity. Many of the things that you described, the different changes in even empathy, possessing empathy is in some sense subversive. Subversive or almost harmful to your own prospects, job, career-wise or otherwise. So all of these, I really think that the value or the way to change, one way to change, is for people to speak honestly, openly, and authentically, and to come together and to demonstrate, to live a different way and show that it can be done. And then people will be attracted to it because it is better. It's just a fact.
Rory Varrato, thank you, man. I really do appreciate it. This is Extinction Rebellion, the New York chapter. Again, action is going to be tomorrow. If there's any links or anything you want me to put at the bottom of this video, I will.
Great.
And thank you again for showing up, man. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it so much.
All right, guys, I'm going to end this here. If you all enjoy the content, please consider liking, sharing, and you can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all. And we are